You wrote a letter to Prime Minister Boris Johnson asking him to cancel all the contracts, particularly with Bain. Have you received any response from the Prime Minister?
I've not received a response so far, and I wouldn't have expected to so quickly. It was only sent last Thursday, Friday. So what I'm now expecting from the British government is to say that all companies that operate in the United Kingdom must do so within the normal rules of proper, honest business practice, and that if they get involved in corruption and state capture, as the Zondo Commission report showed had happened to Bain, Bain were up to their necks in the corruption and getting enormous fees for it as well, then they must not be allowed to operate in other countries. Because we've got to call a halt to this. This is the wholesale looting under former President Zuma and the Gupta brothers could not have happened without Bain and Co., without the KPMGs, without McKinsey, SAP, and then the banks, HSBC, Standard Chartered, and Bank of Baroda. They were all involved in facilitating the corruption. It took two to tango, not just corrupt politicians and business people, but also global corporates that helped themselves to masses of fees and in return ensured that this corruption and looting continued and the money laundering out of the country by the billions of rand.
There's a tendency to go for smaller men and women when countries are dealing with an issue of corruption. But the big guns, people with influence, people in high offices get away with murder. Do you think in this case it will be a different outcome?
Well, I'm not sure. I wrote the letter to Prime Minister Boris Johnson because I want action. It's no good making speeches in the British Parliament saying we don't like corruption and we don't like money laundering and we've got strict laws and everybody's got to abide by the rules. If companies, if global corporates break the rules in another country, they should be punished at home as well. All of these banks, all of these corporates, including Bain and Company, are either headquartered here in London, from where I'm speaking from the British Parliament, or they have big offices here, and they are supposed to comply with the anti-corruption, anti-money laundering legislation that is on the British statute book. It is the law of the country. And yet in South Africa they didn't. And so you can't have one law for operating in South Africa and maybe developing countries across the world, and then another law for operating in the UK or the USA or Europe. It's got to be the same. And if you are going to be complicit and conspire with corrupt politicians to loot as a global corporate, then you should be punished globally as well. That seems to me to be the principle that we've now got to establish in countries like the UK and countries like the USA and across Europe as well, because all of these global corporates are desperate to do business, not just in the South Africas of this world, but in the United States, in the UK, in these big economies. And when they start hurting in these big economies, which is the purpose of my letter to the Prime Minister asking him to take action against Bain and Company, if they start hurting here, then they won't allow themselves to be dragged into corruption in other countries, in Africa, Latin America, Asia, or elsewhere.
Looking at the legislation in the United Kingdom, can you take us through the law that you are talking about, perhaps the one that can be used to get these people to account?
Well, there is quite stringent money laundering and anti-corruption legislation. And of course, as a result of the pressure and the requests that I made a few years ago, the Gupta brothers and some of their associates were put on the UK sanctions list, like has happened in the United States. But still, no action has been taken against these corporates for what they did and helped all the looting to occur. And so I can't promise you that there will be any action, because prime ministers and presidents across the world say they're opposed to corruption. But unless the governments of the world cooperate together and force international banks and force international corporates, auditors, accountants, estate agents, management consultants, lawyers, unless they force them to start complying with the law and stopping the allowing corruption to happen and getting fees for doing so, for setting up front companies as they did for the Gupta brothers in Dubai and Hong Kong and elsewhere. They did that. All these auditors and accountants and lawyers, the Gupta brothers were not able to do that sort of thing themselves. They had to get professionals to help them, advise them on how to do it. So these people have got to be hit hard. And my objective is to say all the companies named, and I expect more to be named in the devastating terms that Bain and Company were indicted by the Zondo Commission last week. All of these companies that are attacked and are deemed to have acted unlawfully, against the law in South Africa, which is what the Zondo Commission said about Bain and Company, then they must face the consequences in Washington or London or Paris or Berlin or Madrid.
You have an organization that represents big business in South Africa, one of them saying that Bain has shown remorse by paying back and apologies, and they were upfront, and they must be left off the hook.
Well, I don't agree with that. Bain may have paid back. I'm told, I haven't seen conclusive proof, but let's accept that they may have paid back the 170 million that was involved in the South African Revenue Service, the SARS contract with Tom Moyane, former President Zuma's placement, to destroy the organisation. They may have paid that money back, but they own 2 billion rand in fees from state-owned enterprises, a lot of which have been shown to be involved in corruption, like Eskom and South African Airways and so on, during the state capture period. They should pay all that money back. And they should also go through the legal process of the law. The Zondo Commission has recommended that the National Prosecuting Authority and the police now bring Bain and Company to justice and face action in the courts. That's got to continue, and then see what the verdict is before Bain and Company should be admitted back by South African business into accepted as a normal company. And I think that should be true for any of the other corporates named by the Zondo Commission. Otherwise, what is the point of having an anti-corruption commission headed by Deputy Chief Justice Zondo if nobody feels that there should be any punishment at the end of it? What is the point? I think South African business organisations that support Bain and Company should hang their heads in shame.
Do you think Bain did this based on the fact that the continent is vulnerable for such activities?
Probably. And the fact that when it was an issue, when their role was exposed before the Zondo Commission's hearings, when their role was exposed, it was by investigative journalists in the South African media and by politicians, opposition politicians. When it was a South African political and media story, then these global corporates think they can get away with it. When 4 years ago I named all these companies under parliamentary privilege here in London in the British Parliament in Westminster, then they started getting stories on the Financial Times, the international business newspaper, in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Then their global bosses started thinking, hang on a minute here, maybe something bad went on in South Africa, but we're getting hurt. Our reputation here in these international global capitals of the world, we're getting hurt, and our reputation is at stake. That's when they started to take action. So I think unless they feel the heat in New York and London and Paris and Berlin and Madrid and Beijing and Delhi, unless they start feeling the heat there, this sort of thing is going to continue. They'll feel they can get away with it.
Feeling the heat, your last message to those countries that are harboring companies that are involved in such activities?
Well, I say to Beijing, in respect of Hong Kong especially, to Delhi, where the Gupta brothers live and have property and have businesses, in India, I say to them, and I say to the UK government and the United States government and the French government and the Spanish government and the Italian government and the German government, all of them, you have got to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. You have got to bring these global corporates to heel and force them to obey the law and force them to obey the rules. And when money laundering happened, as billions of rand were left the country through HSBC's financial network, through Standard Chartered Bank's financial network, through Bank of Baroda's financial network, into their Dubai offices or their Hong Kong offices and elsewhere, then those international financial systems, there is a digital footprint to all of that. They'll know where the money went. They should act with the government, the Indian government, this Chinese government, the American government, the British government, and all the other governments of the world to make sure that this stops and that the money is traced and it is brought back.